My name is Jeff Gray, and I'm the discipleship pastor at Living Truth Church, and I want to welcome you to another session of our sermon series that's entitled As You Go. And this sermon topic comes from Luke chapter 5, and it's the story of the paralytic. And the focal point of this message for us, when we look at all we've been through so far as a group, we've looked at the home, we've looked at church, we've looked at our neighborhoods, we've talked about the importance of being a light in our communities. But today's session is on a segment of people that live in our community that most of us may feel uncomfortable with for one reason or another. And so we've entitled this one, As You Go Among the Least. So who are the least of our community? Well, when you think about the least, if you look at it from a secular point of view, typically people refer to those that are the least are those that don't really contribute in a positive way to the community. They're people that are burdensome, so to speak, to a community, that they can't contribute, they don't help, they always have needs that others have to meet. So as we think about this idea of people in our community that are the least, right? We have to be careful about that, because what the world sees as people as the least are exactly the people that Jesus came for. And so when we think about the least in our community, we're thinking about people that the world would see as people that don't contribute, but really their only contribution is burdensome. They're burdensome to society because they don't help, yet they have needs that others have to meet on their behalf. So when I think about that, I think about the way the world would define the least. It would be the homeless. It would be people that are living in addiction. It might represent people that are women that are living in a situation where they're in a domestic violence shelter, kids living in an orphanage. There are so many different ways that people find themselves in really bad situations where they're just hanging on for dear life. But as we look at Luke chapter 5, we'll see there's a really interesting example of someone that's in that least category, and it's the paralytic man. And this paralytic man, for me, I look at a story, he's a blessed man because he had friends that truly cared about him enough to go the extra mile, to go the distance, to do the hard things in order to get him before Jesus. And so as we look at that story in Luke chapter 5, we know the story. We see the story where this man is brought in and dropped through the roof, and we see this beautiful encounter, how two things that happen in the story that really touch my heart. One is that the first thing that Jesus addresses is the spiritual health of this man. He addresses the spiritual health, and he first forgives him of his sins, and then he heals his legs. This man gets up and he walks out of that room a free man. And it's a beautiful story. And I think one of the things that I remember hearing at one point on the mission field, spoken by a friend, and he said, this is a beautiful story because in this story it represents, let me rephrase that. He said that, what if Jesus would have just healed the man's legs and not forgiven him of his sins? What if Jesus would have just provided a humanitarian service without gospel proclamation, without an offering for the forgiveness of sins, right? Well, if that would have happened, my friend's comment was, then that man would have walked out of that home with two whole legs and could have walked right into hell with them. So as I think about this idea of humanitarian relief among the least, I recognize through life experiences, being abroad and living in some of the poorest places in the world, that we've got to be wise in how we provide relief. It should always be attached to the gospel. At every chance we get, we should attach anytime we help someone with some type of gospel presentation, whether it's our personal testimony, a time of prayer, but ultimately it should be about the gospel. Because what I see happening around the world, for example, there's atheist organizations right now doing hurricane cleanup down where Hurricane Ian made landfall, right? There's the Muslim foundation that does all kinds of humanitarian work for Allah. And then you have the Hindu Federation of Humanitarian Work, and they do work around the world, and none of it is gospel-centered, right? So the fact that we do humanitarian work, every religion does humanitarian work. Even people that aren't religious do humanitarian work. So for us as the followers of Jesus, he tells us to love our neighbors. But it's important we realize that as we love our neighbors, we do it in a wise way, a way that would honor him. And in every opportunity, that includes giving people life eternal through the gospel. So as you think through this idea of here to help and how we're going to be engaging our community, I'm really hoping that each team will choose one of their projects to be focused on the least. And as a CPR group, you may end this video and then talk about some of the groups that you're aware of in our community that are among the least, that would benefit from us demonstrating love in a physical way, and then spending time loving on them and then praying with them and maybe even presenting the gospel to them. So my encouragement is, as you end this video, take some time to talk about the least in your community. Pray for the least in your community. Pray for the groups or programs that are pursuing and working with these communities of these people that really have nothing to offer other than their lives to Jesus. So with that being said, thank you for your time on this session. And I just hope and pray that we'll be busy as a church about ministering to the least in our community.